All right, family, what's going on? It's your brother, Dr. Assad. I um I guess I'm getting pretty good at being consistent with uploading videos to YouTube. Well, let me just say I did one yesterday and I'm doing one today. So if that's consistency, I'll take it. But I wanted to have a really quick conversation, excuse me, about are African Americans Africans? And I know that this has been uh, a kind of um, tension-filled conversation, both within Black America or in African American communities, as well as between Africans and African Americans. Are Black people in the United States African American? So, first, let's get a little history of this terminology. Many Black Americans uh, call themselves Black Americans as opposed to African Americans. And this is because we have gone through several designations, right? Um, if we go back to the earliest designations to refer to this group of people that we call African Americans slash Black Americans, if we go back to the earliest designations, um, around 1787, I believe, or 1784, Richard Allen founded the African Methodist Episcopal Church. African Methodist Episcopal Church. And that is about a decade after the founding of the United States of America. So, from the earliest inceptions of this country as we know it, the United States of America, we refer to ourselves as African. Again, I believe that Prince Hall founded the African Lodge. And if Prince Hall is a Freemason, and if I am saying that wrong, someone feel free to correct me. But I believe that his lodge is called the Prince Hall Lodge, or sometimes referred to as the African Lodge, right? So we early on in this country embraced the terminology or the designation as African. As slavery continued, and slavery ended, during the time of slavery, we were most likely no longer referred to as African, but referred to by the N word, right? That became synonymous really with who we were, slaves or the N word. We were property, not people. So there was no need to designate us with a specific name that had any origin or connection to origin. So after slavery, the term Negro became pervasive and prevalent, and we used that terminology, that designation, well into the 60s, and in the 70s, there was the switch from Negro to Black, particularly with the phrase Black Power, right? So Black Power, Black is beautiful, say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud, became more popular than referring to yourself as Negro. Negro began to be an old, outdated terminology, and white racists would often use Negra, right? Kind of an amalgamation of the word Negro and the other N word. Uh, so they would say Negra. So uh, Negro became kind of like, nah, we're not using that. That was associated with a different type of black person. We're now black people, and we're black and we're proud, right? And we're black is beautiful. So we became Black Americans, and for the longest we had that designation. And I believe it is Jesse Jackson, Reverend Jesse Jackson, who is credited with coining the phrase African American. I'm not sure if he created the phrase or if he just popularized the phrase, but and I believe this was in the 80s, maybe 90s, but I would reached to say is the 80s. So the terminology African American began to be used, and it connected us both to our current geography as well as our historic geography. It gave us an origin, Africa, and it gave us a current placement, America. So we became African American, and because black was so popular, and this new terminology arose, many people were resistant to it. And as I spoke about in my last video yesterday, there may have been this underlying resentment in a segment of Black America to be connected to Africa for various reasons, and you can check out that video of 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 why some Black Americans had some hesitation or trepidation to be connected to Africa. However, the terminology African American stuck around, and we now mainly identify as African Americans, or the term Black American, African American are kind of interchangeable. Um, I don't think people really argue over it, although some people, if asked directly, do you identify as a Black American or do you identify as an African American? I think many people will choose one side or the other. I have had conversations with Black Americans, African Americans, who say that no, I don't call myself African American, I'm Black, you know. And I, on the other hand, readily identify as an African American. Um, but with that being said, whatever designation we choose to use, we are African people, African descendant people, and uh, I do. It is my position that African Americans are indeed African, whether we were born on the continent, whether we have been to the continent or not. And here's my first point with that. When we were in Africa, and I say we, I mean our ancestors. When we were in Africa, undoubtedly, right, we were African, right? We were Igbo or Yoruba or Hausa, right? Because a lot of us come from Nigeria, or we were in Angola or in Congo or wherever we may have been. But in West Africa, we were undoubtedly African, right? That makes sense, right? When they put us on those boats, we were still African. We we didn't give up any African rights on those during the Middle Passage on those boats. And when we disembarked in the New World, we were still African, right? So it is my argument that we never gave up our rights to be an African. We never gave up our right to identify as an African, and neither did we stop being an African. Genetically, we are still African. The hair on my face, and if you could see the hair on my head, the color of my skin, right, lets you know that I am a Black person. I am an African person, right? So we did not give up our right to be African. However, we have been heavily influenced by geography, by bondage, by struggle, by liberation, right? So all of these things, by Western um, ideology, Western philosophy. So all of these things have influenced what I would like to call, and to borrow a phrase from Alan Locke. Alan Locke was a Harlem Renaissance writer and scholar. He identified us as a new Negro, right? And since we don't use Negro anymore, I will paraphrase and borrow that phrase and say we are a new African, right? A new African on the planet. One, again, that has been influenced by the West, but is still genetically and in a deep cultural way, right, tied to to Africa. So we are a new African. And I think it's important to note that you say, well, yeah, how can you be a new African? You're not on the continent. Well, if we look at those on the continent in particular, Nigerians are vastly different from Kenyans, both Africans, vastly different from Kenyans. The Habesha of Eritrea and Ethiopia and Djibouti and Somalia, they are vastly different from the, our brothers and sisters in Angola or the Congolese. Vastly different, right? Our brothers and sisters in South Africa, quite different from our brothers and sisters in Sudan, right? Yet they are all African, as different as they are in language and religion and cultural expression and tradition and heritage, right? Vastly different practices. They're still African, right? But they all started somewhere, they all began from through migration of the Bantu or whomever to this place or that place, right? And these new Africans begin to develop in new parts of Africa. So the only thing that's significantly different from us is that we didn't develop on the continent, but we developed as a new African in a new context, in a new continental context, right? But that again did not change who we were as Africans. And I want to point out specifically some things that really tie New Orleanians to to our cultural uh, West African roots. Excuse me. So I am from New Orleans, right? If you're an African American, Black American watching this, you already know about New Orleans, or you should know about New Orleans. But if you're a continental African, you may not really know what it's like here in New Orleans. I would argue that New Orleans save save the Geechee Gully Islands outside of South Carolina and Georgia. Besides those places, uh, New Orleans is the most African place in the United States of America. I don't think you can find a more African place, a place where African traditions really run rampant and have become a part of the culture of a place. I like to remind people that up until 2005, the population of New Orleans was 70%, 68% to be exact, but rounded up 70% African American. This is important, which is all. What is also important is that in New Orleans, um, during the time of slavery, New Orleans, for a large portion of um antebellum Louisiana slave times, um, uh, Louisiana was under the control of the French, and the French had a different, as it was still a brutal approach, but they had a different approach to slavery. The terminology was laissez-faire, right? Laissez-faire approach to slavery, and one of those, and one of the signatures, for lack of a better term, or markers of that laissez-faire form of enslavement was that on Sundays, Africans or the enslaved slaves, Black Americans, were allowed a day off, and we were allowed, watch this, to practice, watch this, African traditions. And this went on for centuries. So here in the United States, you had Africans, Black Americans, right? Black Africans who became Black Americans, enslaved Africans, practicing um, Ifa, right? Which later became, which is the reason why New Orleans is known for voodoo, right? It later became this this mesh between this syncretism, I believe it's called, between Catholicism and Ifa, right? So we were allowed to practice those those religious traditions. Um, there's a place here in New Orleans called Congo Square, and for the last 300 years, Africans, Black Americans, right? African Americans have met in Congo Square. Congo Square is what it's called, right? To every Sunday to drum, to dance, to honor the ancestors, to commune with one another, to burn incense, right? Right? To involve ourselves with spirit possession. Very, very West African. We have been able to continue those type of traditions. Our food here in New Orleans. Here in New Orleans, we eat a dish called gumbo. Now, most people know that gumbo is a West African dish. And although our gumbo in New Orleans is rooted in okra most of the time, it has also been influenced by the French. So the flavor profile of our gumbo is different from what you may find in West Africa. However, it is still rooted in the West African dish. Jambalaya is a rice dish made with red, it's a red rice dish made with tomato, right? And it is rooted in the West African dish jollof. And I've had Ghanaian jollof, I've had Nigerian jollof, and I've had New Orleans jambalaya. In fact, there is a West African restaurant here in New Orleans called Bennichin's. Bennichin's, and on Bennichin's menu, it doesn't. It says it doesn't call jollof jollof. It calls it West African jambalaya. It calls it West African jambalaya because it's a similar dish. Now again, it's jambalaya is a little different because the jollof, at least the jollof that I've had, was a rice dish cooked by itself, and if you had any protein or meat, it was something that was on the side. Jambalaya, on the other hand, meat is infused into the dish, sausage, chicken, or sometimes shrimp are all infused into the dish. So there's a different flavor profile, but the base, that rice and that tomato base, is exactly the same as jollof. Also, if we look at the housing here in New Orleans, we have what we call shotgun homes. Shotgun homes. And the reason why they're called shotgun homes because it comes from being able to stand at the front door and to look directly through a house and see the outside the back door. Meaning, so they said a shotgun home, meaning I can take a shotgun and shoot through the home and shoot from one end out the back. America's a violent place. I don't know why our analogies have to involve violence and guns, but that's why it's called a shotgun home. Um, but if one would to search the history of those homes and how they uh, came to New Orleans, you'll find that they came to New Orleans via Haiti, right? And the West Africans who were enslaved in Haiti who came to New Orleans after the Haitian Revolution when white slave masters slash landowners fled Haiti and brought their slaves into New Orleans and brought those West African slaves into New Orleans. And those West African slaves brought that architecture, that architectural style with them to New Orleans that came from West Africa, uh, parked for a moment in Haiti, and then was imported into New Orleans. So all around our city, we have shotgun homes that have their root and their architectural lineage in West Africa. Finally, um, we can look at a place. There's a place in Louisiana, a city in Louisiana, and New Orleans is in the state of Louisiana. Um, there is a city in this state, right, called Angola, right? And it is, yes, it is named after the African country of Angola. And the reason why how it got its name is that there were so the city of Angola is basically now a penitentiary. And on that penitentiary, it is nothing but farmland. And so it used to be a plantation. And on that plantation, the overwhelming majority of enslaved Africans on that plantation came from Angola. So when the slavery was over and the state wanted to open a new prison, this land, this plantation was donated to the state, given to the state to be the site of the Louisiana State Penitentiary, the new prison, or this is the prison is old now, very old. But the site of this new prison was in Angola, and that's what they call it, Louisiana State Penitentiary at Angola. So that city became named Angola after those Africans who were on that plantation. Um, um, So many of our cultural practices that we have here in New Orleans, for instance, if you've ever seen a New Orleans funeral, um, there are some practices that are very similar to those in Ghana, where we carry our caskets of our loved ones through the street and mourn in the street with our caskets. With the casket on our shoulders, we mourn in the street. Now we have uh, added some other elements to that because once we drop that casket off at the grave site, then we turn it into a celebratory type of event with up-paced music. It's called a jazz funeral, a second line funeral. You can look it up and see what that looks like. But again, that again is rooted in uh, uh, West Africa, the carrying of the casket and of your loved one through the streets. You find those practices, or you can find those practices in West Africa. So now that's a specifically New Orleans interpretation of being an African American or being a new African, and to say that we are African. Um, but there are many other cultural traditions within the Black community that can be traced directly to our our continental brothers and sisters to the continent. Hair braiding, which all over West Africa, all over Africa, hair braiding is a thing, and here in the U.S., I mean, if you ask any sister if she remembers sitting between her mother's legs on a Saturday afternoon with with a comb in her hand braiding her hair, I'm sure she has many stories for you, right? um, so there are many traditions that we have that still connect us to the continent. And I'm not going to argue and say that they're the strongest connections, but my argument is not that we have to have these super duper strong connections, because we can be as different as new Africans. We can be as different as from Nigerians uh, to Kenyans, or Habesha to South African. We don't have to follow a particular uh, African script, for lack of a better term. We are a new African, so we are writing a new script on what it means to be an African person. So again, 25 minutes. I think that's my target goal, right? Is once I hit 25 minutes, I think I've said all that I had to say. Again, man, thank you guys for listening. I'm really enjoying making these little videos. It's quite different from what Adrian and I were doing before, when we would talk about our travels and all that good stuff. And we're going to get back to that when we leave next month. But just to have these conversations, I guess, with you guys and really with myself, because I'm talking to a camera. But I would love for you guys to comment. Give me your thoughts on that. Maybe I'm looking at this thing wrong. And maybe someone can give me some insight that will. I'm not the smartest man on earth. Um, and I believe that the smartest person on earth, the most intelligent person, is the one who knows that he knows nothing at all, right? So if there's some stuff that you think, hey, well, Doc Assad, maybe you should look at it this way, or here's another perspective. I would love to hear it. So you could please leave it in the comments, and I'm sure I'll respond to it and tell you what I think. And maybe you can lead me to some sources, some because I do believe in the data and I do believe in citation. Right? Find me the source. Don't give me just what you think. I don't mind having just what you think, but if you just want to disagree because you want to disagree and you don't have any argument and any valid sources to back up your argument, then I'm going to call that out. But anyway, man, I appreciate you guys taking the time to listen. I'm really enjoying this, and you guys have a good one. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time I upload a video.